A quick word before today's episode. Roane and I are deeply grateful for the reach and impact this podcast has had to date. The content has been a mix of things we've seen and experienced on our own journey to health, and nothing makes us more determined to keep expanding this effort than when we receive messages from you, our listeners. We're consistently hearing stories of hope and healing from all around the world these days, and that's incredible. As we pace through the second half of 2024, our commitment is to continue bringing you relevant information around sensitive topics. Lastly, we need your help. There are thousands more out there just like us, those who desire to live more healthy and purposeful lives, especially around our sexuality. So take a moment, share an episode with your friends. You never know what they may be working through in their own lives. Thanks for being with us. And here's to healthier sex, more God, and less chaos. Welcome to the Sex, God, and Chaos podcast, a conversation built to help you address the mess, connect the dots, and defeat addiction. Doing your work matters because if nothing changes, then nothing changes. Life is tough and we're here to help. I'm your host, Derrick, and as always, I'll be joined by Roane Hunter. Let's jump right in. Roane, another day as friends, it's a small miracle. We made it this far.
Seems to go that way with our friendship. I don't know. I'm not sure.
It's very durable.
Never sure.
Yeah,
never
very
sure.
durable. Yeah. Trust the elasticity. That's what I'm saying. So, man, we're having a blast doing this. And I mean, the fact that it's making an impact, that's awesome. The fact that we're enjoying being here together, that's awesome. I mean, I say it nearly every episode, but when you're in the middle of something that it feels like has just been a gift into your life, you just want to honor that by speaking it out loud.
Mm-hmm. Man, it's just fun. And hopefully it seems that maybe we're helping some people along the way. The numbers keep growing, and we certainly appreciate that. And but it still just doesn't. I mean, it's just fun as hell.
Absolutely. We're doing this because we're willing to talk about.
I just like fun as hell. Is that really? That's a terrible saying.
Well, it made absolute sense to me.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's just yeah. Some of these things we say.
Yeah, I don't know. Listen, we can't get stuck there.
That's right.
But I think part of what we're doing here that's so attractive is that we're willing to talk about the things that most people just won't talk about.
Yeah.
And we're being very public with that. That as I sit with people who listen to these episodes inside of my client base, that's a consistent message they're giving me. No one has ever explained these things to me, and especially in the way that you guys and your guests are talking about it. The reason we're doing it this way is because we see people finding freedom and healing just by navigating into those uncomfortable spaces and talking about these issues.
Well, so much of it is just, having a conversation. So often in working with a couple, they obviously they're having sex. There's some children running around, so they're not immaculately conceived. Mm-hmm. But man, they do not communicate. They will not talk about it at all.
Right. The agreement is non-communication. Yeah. That's the agreement.
Yeah. And it really, when you look at it, most couples operate, it's kind of like adolescent teenagers when it comes to what we call their sexual dance, where it's kind of, you throw the hint out there, kind of like when you're dating as teenagers and you put your arm here and then you kind of lower the arm and you keep going and nobody says anything. And then it's like, oh God, but now we're 40 years old and we're still doing that. That's probably not the best practice and probably not healthy sexuality.
I'll be the first to admit when you describe it that way, it's so emasculating. I'm so sorry that people can't see your physical posture and moves as you're doing that.
We got to get the video. We got to get the YouTube video podcasting thing going.
Yeah, stay tuned. It's on its way.
Beautiful.
On its way, yeah.
That's right.
So I actually brought up this topic for this episode today because I just had an experience in my own work sitting at Ebenezer, walking through this topic, and some new things opened up in my story that excited me because they were accountability based. New information is great. And we've talked about this here and there on this podcast. We actually had Debbie Laser come in, and this is a lot of their work that they did and made very public through a book. But these 7 desires of the human heart, just such a rich topic, and I felt like we needed to go back to it. As you and I were talking off mic, we use this so often in our private practices to help people figure out how to communicate, especially, and this is where we were invited into the story. I'm still waiting on that appointment where someone kicks back on the couch and like, yeah, I'm just here because I wanted to tell you how great things are going, right?
And I really want to see how you're doing.
Yeah, tell me how you're doing. Yeah. We are pulled in that high conflict, hypervigilance, crisis sort of place. And these desires give a great framework to try to navigate some really difficult circumstances. So based on statistics, I'm guessing that a lot of our listeners are in that place right now. I don't exactly know how to communicate. This experience is overwhelming, or that would be the female word. Frustrating would be the male word. I don't know how to navigate this. So we want to offer our listener base these 7 desires and go into them a little bit and how to use them inside of a coupleship. Also how to use them in your own story and journey of growth.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things we say, sex is not a need, it is a desire. And really, our acting out sexually in our sexual brokenness it's not about sex. It really is more about the longing for true intimacy, for connection. And so it's like, this is kind of fundamental. What's the longing? What's the desire? And these 7 desires are really, I think, kind of what God has placed in all of our hearts that we're actually really longing for and searching for. And you go back to the beginning, the Hebrew word desire, the word appears, I think it's maybe the first time in the story of Cain and Abel, and Cain's getting ready to kill Abel. And, God shows up, comes to Cain, and he says, Cain, this desire that wages war inside of you, if you don't master it, it will destroy you. So this isn't a Jesus take the wheel kind of a deal. God, we actually have to do work in this.
Wait a minute.
In this process.
Let's not shift paradigms right in the middle of an episode.
Oh Lord, we'll have the Baptists and the Presbyterians will be. Look, if you have complaints, it's Ben Derrick at Ben Derrick email. I don't know
.com.
Yeah, email Ben. Yeah, because I don't care. But when it shows up and it's this idea of desire. And then you flip over to Psalms and it says, delight yourself in the Lord and he will give you the desires of your heart. So wait a minute, God, what is it? If we're just reading it in the English language, that is confusing. But the Hebrew word there for desire, the first time it appears when God comes to Cain, it is the Yetzer Hara. And I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that. Just whatever. It
sounds bad.
Southern Hebrew. But it is the idea of all the dark desires. And, it's not just murder. It's murder, greed, envy, lust, all of those dark desires that are part of the dualistic nature of a human being that we all have in us. And guess what? It doesn't go away just when we, get saved, born again, whatever dumb term we want to use. That dualistic nature is there and will be there until the day we do see Jesus face to face.
Well, thank you. Look, just to interrupt right there, let's say there are 2 things that the religious community is confused about that would be solutions at a nuclear level, baptism and marriage. Those 2 things do not solve the dualistic nature of man.
Wow. Can you just go do a sermon on that like right now somewhere.
Probably, but that's not why people have tuned in. Let's stay on task.
Oh gosh, but these are fundamental ideas, and so much of this work, when it's in the arena of sexual brokenness, betrayal, infidelity, we're getting down to the roots and the marrow, the bone and marrow of the soul. And so really it is foundational, going back and really beginning to examine our whole entire belief system, beginning to understand God for who he really is, the Jesus I never knew, not the church one. And so it really is fundamental. And when you begin to uncover and discover these things, which, by the way, it seems like everything that I've have uncovered and discovered that has been really good is stuff I've had to dig up on my own. I didn't hear it on Sunday mornings. I know we just lost. No church guys they're not going to listen.
We're safe here.
They're not going to listen to us anyway.
Yeah. And there probably are, just to inject here, because we've said this on other episodes, there probably are a lot of pastors out there that are doing that very same thing, but the Western church is not open or safe for those things to be. And I've had the privilege to have cups of coffee and meals with a lot of pastors, being one for so long. There's a lot going on in that man's life that he doesn't feel safe to talk about inside that environment. So some of it's on the man. He needs to get a little bit of courage and actually lead people. Some of it is on the system and the congregation that's just not open to that. However, the big part about that is it's a certain slice, usually a very small slice of the congregation, that's not open for that. The rest of the people, like us, are desperate for this. Desperate for this information. So this is what's so great about us just slinging this stuff out here, because all you have to have is an iPhone to get this information. But you're right. It's like, well, I've got to venture out and I've got this specific issue and it feels like a dark desire. Well, the first thing I have to do is admit it. And I'm certainly not going to a Christian bookstore to try to find, hey, I'm here to find the book on dark desires. Do you have that? Right. But the world has changed so much in the past 20, 25 years.
Dude, that reminds me, years ago, there was a book, I think the title of the book was Why Some Christians Commit Adultery. And it was in Christian bookstores. And of course, I remember wherever I was in my recovery journey, but I'm like, oh, I'm going to get that book, of course, Right. But then it's like, you got to walk up to the counter and you always want to go, this is for a friend, right?
Well, you have to put the testaments on top.
That's right. But like months later, I was back in the Christian bookstore and that book had a sticker on the front that actually said, you have a friend that needs this book. So I guess they figured out nobody was buying the book. I don't know who wrote it. I can't remember. But
you
anyway.
have a friend.
The publisher had kind of, oh, gosh, this isn't going to sell.
This is hitting too close to home. So these dark desires, as you described this, and I've listened to you do this teaching a few times, man, it just feels so true and so to the center of who we are. And the things that we spend our lives battling are these things. And unfortunately, when you run into them in the Bible, it kind of feels like a list, but it doesn't live like a list.
It is real.
They are strong motivators.
Well, and that Yetzer Hara, the dark desire, it is there. That's just reality. And when we come across these things, and it's like I always say, man, when I come across something that like it makes sense to me and then experientially it makes sense, not only in my own life, but in sitting with many, many, many other people along the way, okay, there's something there. And so there's the dark desire, and then, you go to the Psalms and, the good desires. And the word there is the Yetzer Hara, and those are the good desires that God has placed in every human heart, which, by the way, this idea of the desires, 7 desires, I'm not going to go on a rant, but I was validated not long ago because I read an article about the 5 love languages, which evidently seems to be mandatory reading, even more so than the Bible in every Christian church. And I'm just jealous. Gary Chapman sold, 25 million copies of that dumb book. But this goes much deeper because this gets to the real matters of the heart. I mean, like, come on, who doesn't like acts of service? God,
right.
I want my wife to serve me all the time. She won't, but I want her to. Touch.
But it's my love language.
Yeah, don't touch me. I mean, who does? I just, whatever. I don't know. I'm jealous. And so, by the way, he actually was not I always thought he was a licensed counselor.
As did I.
Counselor dude. No, he got one of those doctor degrees from, whatever, some mail-in seminary or something. I'm jealous. I love Gary Chapman. If you're listening, Gary, call me. We'd love to have you on the podcast. But back to the good desires.
Yes.
And so those good desires, of course, we're in the Old Testament, but you flip over to the New Testament, and James is writing about it in James chapter 4. And James says, and he affirms this dualistic nature. What is it that causes fights and quarrels among you? It is your desires, which is both the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Hara. It is your desires that wage war inside of you. And so there we see the internal conflict in every human heart, right? Good desires, bad desires. And therein lies the cognitive dissonance, as we would say in psychobabble world. And there's the setup for the anger, the anxiety, the shame, the depression, because we are at war in our souls. And so it might be important to understand what are those good desires and how do we get those met. But the 7 desires, it's pretty simple. The first one is simply to be heard and understood. And then the next one is to be affirmed. The next one is to be blessed, which I always have fun with this one because, that word, next time somebody at church comes up to you and says, bless your brother, you just look at the guy and go, man, what does that really mean? And he's going to go, I don't know. I heard the pastor say it. Sounds good. Whatever.
Right.
Yeah. But the word, it's just the idea of man, we're blessed to be a blessing. It's like God has added life to us. That's the literal meaning of that word. He's added life to us, and he asked us to add life unto others and have life added unto us by others. Connection. And so that's what it means. We're blessed to be a blessing. And then the next one is to be safe, and certainly that's physical safety. That's a no-brainer. But it is the idea of emotional safety. I want to know that the person that I'm with is a safe person. That's true in your marriage, of course, but it's also true of your friendships. And oftentimes, some of the most unsafe people are the people that want to put you on the prayer list at church. You don't ever want to be on the prayer list. But it can be a very unsafe place. And so that's part of what we all have to begin to figure out, who are safe people. And so that to be safe is so critical is in a relationship, any relationship. And then to be touched, in it's non-sexual touch. And if you're married, it is sexual touch. So it's a both and there. But the touch piece is so important. After World War II, babies in Russian orphanages didn't have enough caregivers. And, many of those babies actually died from the lack of human contact. And many suffered greatly long-term problems as a result of that. And so that human touch is that's a need. That's a desire. And then the next is to be included. We all want to be included, right? It's one of the things that drives us to be accepted, to be included. And then the last one is simply to be chosen. And I mean, everybody gets that when you talk about it, because you remember you're in grade school, and we'll take I guess we'll have to take Ben. He's the only one. He's the only one left.
Last one.
Yeah. So, man, that's a bummer, right? You knew it well, I know.
Yeah. Well, I never experienced it, but I heard about it.
That's right. But man, we all want to be chosen. And so when you start looking at each of these desires, and keeping in mind, what James said, what is it that causes fights and quarrels among you? If you dug down into that, it probably says it is the unmet desires, the unmet good desires. Because when those are unmet, we will go to some illegitimate means on the dark side of desire, trying to get it met. And there's 1,000 different ways that we get real creative with trying to get these desires met that we're longing for. But if we never even knew what they are, how do we even go about getting them? Oh, I know, sex.
Yeah. So many things driving. This is why this conversation is so intricate and so complex, because it drives a lot of our behavior and we don't even understand what's going on. And we start to pursue these, what I would call false solutions. So in relation to the moment I was talking about that happened just a couple of weeks ago, I realized that I had a stronger desire for two of these to be met in my life just based on my personality. And I would propose that we go to our caregivers first for these, just as you alluded to. And I wasn't getting them, not because my caregivers, my parents, were bad people. They're amazing, beautiful people. They just missed on this, right? And I think they were making attempts to, and I just missed on it sometimes because it wasn't delivered in the way that I actually wanted it to be delivered. And that's on me, not on them. But I still have these drivers in my life. I want to be affirmed, and I want to be heard and understood. So when I'm having lengthy knockdown drag-outs with my wife, even in my marriage right now, it's over those things. I don't feel heard. I know I'm not being understood based on what you're saying back to me. And you're not affirming my position here of what I'm trying to say. You're not affirming me even as an individual, a man, as a husband. That started very early in my life, which goes back to the historical comment that we make a lot here on this podcast. Mm-hmm. Well, when I realized that was a cul-de-sac and that was a dead end, then I decided, okay, well, if that's not going to happen, I'm going to take control of my own desires. That is usually a bad decision, but it's one that we make very easily. If it's not being given to me, then I've got to go out there and get it. That's very natural. So going through my adolescent years, well, of course, you're waking up to your sexuality. And for me, I became obsessed, and I'm using that word very intentionally. I became obsessed with being chosen and being touched. That was my every single day. Now, they didn't happen very often, but that was what was driving me. And so much of my regret over that period of my life that was extended is over those things, because looking back now, I realize that those weren't the needs that you really wanted. You were taking those as like a section, a subset of the clause here, like A and B, and you were trying to get satisfaction over that. And as we sit and talk with men, especially about pornography consumption, you can see the light bulb go off above them. That's why this isn't satisfying me. That's why I'm pursuing more and more novel things. That's why this is escalating, because it is a false solution. I didn't even know that there was a need that was driving this that wasn't even connected to my sexuality.
Man, and, Ben, just as you talk about just, teenage years and all of that, these desires, obviously, in the ideal world we don't live in, we would have parents that understood this and spoke all these things into our hearts, but they didn't know either, and they did the best they could with what they had. And as you said, you had great parents.
Yeah.
And at the same time, these things, there's lots of ways that they become deficient. And when you look at them, teenage boys, all of us, We discovered penises. We discovered masturbation. Okay, and then pornography comes into the mix. But when you think about that in light of desires, I know I just said masturbation, and people are like freaking out, but hey, it's one of those things everybody does, nobody talks about, and it's a problem. It certainly can be a huge problem.
Right.
And so it's one of those things we need to talk about. But when you look at the 7 desires and you think about masturbation and pornography, well, the woman on the screen, I was going to say on the page, but I'm old.
Thank you for updating that metaphor.
Gosh, but the woman on the screen, right? Man, she understands me. She hears me. She knows what I'm about, right? And then affirmation. Holy cow! Wow, she's smiling. Oh, she's opened up every part of who she is. I'm so affirmed.
On demand.
Absolutely. Are we getting ready to add some life here, right? Whoa, this is life.
Yes.
I discovered fire.
Dopamine.
Yeah, I mean, it's pumping. And then, safe. Is it safe? Well, yeah, that woman on the screen and masturbating is so safe. Oftentimes, even married men, boy, masturbation and pornography is a whole lot. There's a whole lot less anxiety. It's really easy because I don't have to worry about is this going okay? Am I pleasing? All of that anxiety that's just part of any sexual act. In marriage, there's anxiety when you have sex. It's one of the things that creates arousal. So now we're getting these desires met, right? As you just even go down the list, it's very safe because it's there's no fear, there's no anxiety, and then touch, yeah, you got that figured out,
correct?
Right?
Yeah,
and so that's happening. I'm touching myself. She's not, but I am touching. I'm getting touched by myself. So now that one's being met. And then included, oh wow, I am so included in this in this arrangement, right? She is definitely including me. She wants me. I'm included, and oh my goodness, am I chosen? Wow. So when you begin to look at it from that standpoint, now you've got this conditioned neurological response and physiological because the body is engaged, and even now on a psychological level, all of these desires are being met in a really illegitimate way. But that gets reinforced over time, and now it kind of feels like, oh, wow, this works. And now the brain is conditioned and it becomes patterned. The body is trained to do this. And so it's one reason why it is so hard for men to, stop doing this, because it's been powerfully reinforced.
That's, as I sit and talk with men, obviously in private spaces, when you layer on the phrase regulating behavior and you start to explain that and you zoom out a little bit, before your engagement with pornography and masturbation occurs, what happened before that? And it's very difficult because they're completely covered in shame and embarrassment, which is ridiculous, but they are. It's how it works. You ask what's going on before, and there's been some sort of cataclysmic event, emotional event. And then I start walking them through, okay, well, when did pornography enter into your story? And what was going on in your life then? And was it secret? Was it silent? Was it ever talked about? And then you start putting these pieces together for individuals, frankly, men and women. And it's like, oh my goodness, no one's ever talked to me this way about this. This isn't even a sexual issue. I'm trying to regulate my emotions through this behavior, and I'm not trying. I am.
It works.
It works, and it works beautifully. And you're asking me, and we've alluded to this before, actually, when discovery happens and the spouse is acting out, and then they start to pursue sobriety, because that is step one, the emotions and having to engage those emotions that have formerly been quieted through this behavior. It's a mess. It's difficult. This is why we call it work, because that is work, and you have to start engaging these desires and realizing where these desires have gone unmet, which that even feels weak, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And it's like it's hard because it's been conditioned over such a long period of time. This idea of sobriety, sobriety is, it's paramount. We've got to achieve sobriety. The way we define that, simply no sex with self or others outside of my marriage. And so that's got to happen. However, it's probably not going to be like, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore. I went to see a counselor, and he kind of told me I don't need to do that anymore. It's probably going to take a lot of work, as you say, and it's going to take a lot of time. And that's one of the things with partners and working with this is like this idea of perfection that somehow now it's come to light, and he's going to counseling, he's going to group, he's actually doing his work, and he should never look at his penis again. If he goes to the bathroom, he's going to have to figure out how don't touch it. In the shower, I don't know what you're going to do. And I say that because, man, it is such a hard place because, and I'm just going to use, typically the wife is the partner. Women's brains they are wired differently than a man's brain. Pornography and masturbation in man world is like air and water. Most of us, for me, it was 8 years old. That's on the lower end of discovering pornography. But typically is somewhere in the age of, 10 to 13 is when masturbation and now pornography, that average age of exposure to hardcore porn is somewhere, we're around 9 or 10 years old now. And it's been steadily dropping because the advent of smartphones and high-speed internet, and it's just tragic. But we get exposed to this stuff, and then it's like, man, we discovered fire. It's what it feels like. And nobody's really like, unless you grew up in, I guess, purity culture or rigid religious home, you get, don't do that. You're going to burn and go to hell or something, which is, by the way, a great thing to tell a 13-year-old boy. It's probably not helpful. Maybe you could actually talk to him about it and help him figure this thing out as well.
Those phrases that are thrown around, and I'm interjecting here because this is something that really lights me off. Those phrases help the parents. They don't help the children.
Not at all.
Eventually, those children grow up into adults, and they're dealing with the relational dumpster fire that's going on in their story, and they have to depend on other men and community to help them clean that stuff up. So just as a brief commercial here, I'm going to start making some enemies. If you're a parent that is a very religious parent, devout parent, and your response to these sexually curious things, these natural developmental things, is to slap some religion on there so you can eject out of the conversation real quick because you're uncomfortable, stop. Stop. We sit with so many men, and it happens over and over and over again at our coaching weekends and in our practices. We're having to untangle those wires and untangle that shame because the only commentary that was given is, that's bad and God nearly hates you because of it. Stop. That's the only conversation that occurs, and once those two things are coupled and linked, they will stay linked for life until somebody comes along that cares and gives a damn and helps that person unhook those things, uncouple those things.
Man, so true. And it's really sad because when you do that as a parent and you're shaming, your child, and I'm just going to use shaming the boy, and you're trying to use religion, trying to use God to do it, well, all you're going to do is like, he's going to learn how to hide it better. He's going to go deeper, and he ain't ever going to talk about that with anybody. And boy, that's where dysfunction, dysfunction grows like mushrooms in the secrets and the silence. And so if that's what we're going to give our children, I think when Jesus talked about it's better to have a boat anchor tied around your neck, because as you say, Ben, man, I've been seeing this for forever, the amount of harm that's done in the secret keeping and the silence. It is so sad and it's tragic.
It's an agreement you actually have to break that probably was handed down to you from the generation before, which the Bible actually mentions, that these things will be visited on the generation after you. So as a level of encouragement, the person listening right now may be the person that says, I'm breaking that agreement of silence around particular topics inside of my family. I've been saying over my own story, I will no longer be the secret keeper. That is not my job. And it's terrifying, but it does feel very good and very, very healthy, which those things often go together, right? So as we're talking about these desires and getting back to this list, there's just so many ways that we can go with it. What I would love for our listeners to hear is you and Eva are sitting with people on a very regular basis using these. How do you do that? How do you empower people with this list?
Yeah, I think, one of the ways is just introducing it, bringing it to the table, because like so many people, they've got the 5 love languages, but what are the desires of your heart? What are you really longing for? And this is both male and female. And so it really resonates. And one of the ways that we will work with it with a couple is actually getting them to use it as a check-in. And kind of going down the list. And, in my office, I'll do the whiteboard, I'll write the list, and I'll put, his name and kind of the scorecard on that side and the scorecard on her side. And we just ask the couple, okay, how is this desire to be heard and understood being met by your partner in your relationship? And,
That's a tough one to start with.
Oh, it is. Absolutely. But we just break it down. I don't know, it's 7 of them. And so if you multiply that by 15, you're going to get close to 100. And so I just do, the highest is 15%, and, of course, lowest is 0. And then we're just going down the list. And typically we just kind of, anything above a 10 is good. And this isn't a beat the other up. This is like, what do I really need? Because that's another question we often ask. We'll look at the couple and, we'll ask one of them, what do you need? And it's like deer in the headlights. It's like squirrel crossing the road. I don't know what I need.
I need them to straighten up.
Yeah. Well, and the hard part is if you don't know what you need and you can't ask for what you want and need, then how's the other person ever going to even come close to figuring that out on their own? Yeah.
Well, shouldn't they just know?
Should just know, because, he loves me.
We are in love, and
yeah,
she should just know, she should know based on my 10 p.m. nonverbal cues that I'd like to have sex.
That's right.
She should just know.
Dance. Do the dance.
We should do the dance.
Yeah.
That's the agreement, right?
Oh, gosh.
So using it as a check-in, I love that approach, and actually quantifying it so we can talk about, okay, where's the scale? Where are we? And approaching that, not trying to trap one another, but approaching that with curiosity and being open to that answer. It gets straight to the heart of a lot of stuff we talk about here, which is being open to feedback. This is what it's like to be in a relationship with you. I feel heard about 3% of the time, right?
Yeah.
And it's only when you put the phone down or you close the laptop for work. And then on the other side, it's often like, well, it's only when you're not distracted with other things. Both partners have different versions of that. So the check-in, that's brilliant. I love that. There's other layers to this as well, though, besides just, well, how you doing on it, right? Mm-hmm. There's ways to move into helping to instruct couples with this.
Oh, yeah. And, part of it is like, even kind of going back, into the family of origin, like how were these met in your life growing up? And boy, that's another journey of awareness too, because, as you begin to look at this stuff and you begin to figure out, like for me, I don't think any of those were met except by myself in as I described earlier. That's why I know that so well. But you begin to understand that, man, those deficiencies were part of the, that's what led me into the wilderness, into the darkness, trying to get these needs met, desires met in some illegitimate way.
I'm as a man, I'm a high feeler, as you might imagine. I mean, my emotions are they're big. So I was raised by an Enneagram 1 mother who is a perfectionist. Man, did I lean on that. Like, she got me through a lot of life with that perfectionist instinct. Enneagram 5 father, who is very emotionally suppressed because of a mountain of information we don't have time for. Good man. Now, when a problem needed to be solved, I was looking for him quick because he can do that. And he can speak the truth, too, because he doesn't get caught up in his emotions. So I'm using my parents in the way, like, they're brilliant at things, but I'm this very high-feeling son. And that rattled them to a certain degree because of their own backstories. But I didn't understand that at 6 years old. I just knew that my emotions were very large, and I didn't know what to do with. For instance, the first time I went to a buddy's house, and inside of the double-wide trailer, the Playboys were stacked higher than the toilet. I didn't know what to do with that, right? And my emotions were big on it. I've got this overactive conscience, and I need somebody to talk to me, not in problem-solving mode. I'd be curious to get your take. And this is just, we need to pause. I just need to go to my own therapy here, or just let other people listen. But I find that with high-feeling, emotional men, this is a big trap. Because it's very difficult for parents to meet the need at the level that is actually there. And the worst part about that is when this acting out occurs in their story. That also feels large and intense. And it's a big mess for anybody who's in relationship with that person to try to handle until you can slow that man down enough and say, all right, we got to slow it down to about 5 miles an hour here. This list does that. I know it did that for me on the deck at deer camp, and I've seen it work for other men that way as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think, whether you're, kind of as you describe it, high feeler, I want to say I'm not, but no, I really am. And that's what I find with so many men, because, I didn't have a language for it. None of us do as children. We kind of develop an emotional language. And, parents divorcing at 8 and just growing up being raised by wolves. And, what I learned to do was like shut those big feelings down, right? Because that's survival. And I think so often that's one of the things that we do. But what you see with so many men, it's going to leak out sideways, right? It's coming out. It's like that beach ball that we're trying to hold underwater, and it's going to come out. Either we're going to try to work it away, we're going to try to sex it away, we're going to drink it away, we're going to. We're very creative, but we're men. We're not going to talk about it. And then we don't even know that we have emotions, other than anger. I got that one.
Felt very accusatory there, Roane.
But that's just me looking in the mirror.
Right.
But I think probably more men are high feelers than what we realize.
I would agree with that.
Totally. And so, and then, it's like we'll go to depression. anger turned inward. Well, that's anger is emotion. And I always say, when you see a guy that's angry as hell, that's a depressed guy, because if we know that, everybody kind of knows this today, depression is anger turned inward. Well, if that's true, then the inverse is true as well. Depression is anger turned outward. And man, I sit with the angry guy and I look at him and go, dude, you're so depressed. And he's like, what? He gets really mad and tells me, hell no, I'm not. Yeah. Anyway,
I've had those sessions as well.
But it's like, it's there. The emotions are there. We just didn't know what to do with them. And we certainly couldn't express them. Many of us didn't know we even had them. And then you become a Presbyterian because you're very stoic and you need an emotional EpiPen.
Information.
I have to throw that stuff in there.
Yeah.
I can't help it. Sorry.
Well, I just need to put a list of denominations in front of you so you could choose somebody besides the Presbyterian and the Baptist.
It's just the only two that really matter here.
Right.
Yeah.
So moving towards wrapping up this episode, I think what we're saying here is taking this list, which is readily available. All you have to do is Google 7 desires. You're going to find that. Well, maybe if you have a filter, you would need to have someone else Google 7 desires.
I think just like if you like guys looking for our podcast, we're setting off accountability software
everywhere,
left and right.
Everywhere, yeah. So you take this list, and how I found it helpful is I'm going to layer this list over younger me. Let's keep it very basic. I'm going to layer this list over younger me. I'm going to layer this list over me right now. And then investigate, get curious about those two parts of your story and of your life, which is going to do a lot of good for you anyway. Then layer 2, though, is to be open and communicate about this to a safe person. I'm discovering this list. I'm talking to you about this list. What I find is that it gives men especially the language that they need to start the conversation. And then they're going to find that the women that they're in relationship with can jump right in there and talk about it almost intuitively, which is a little frustrating.
That's who they are.
It's who they are, right? Most of them, it's who they are.
Well, and just before I forget this thought, with those 7 desires, those don't have to be met by a wife. I say this all the time. Those 7 desires, you can get those desires met in a healthy men's group. And then every guy's like, "Whoa, touch! No guy's gonna be touching me." Well, we could call that a brotherly hug, right? In our community, men's community here, good grief, man! I'm every guy I see that I know that I love. Dude, we're gonna hug. We're gonna greet each other with a hug. That's the way it works.
And we're gonna say we love each other.
Out loud, eye to eye, looking each other in the eye, actually saying it. Wow. And we're not the gay men's group. Men can actually love one another. The Bible's pretty clear about that. But all of those desires can be met in a healthy, safe men's community.
This is how we keep from presenting to our spouses as needy.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's part of it, because so often as men, we put all of our emotional eggs in the wife basket. And man, you want to break a marriage down quickly. You take all that to a woman. It's like marriage is like a bridge. Bridges have weight limits, and there's just a weight limit to that. And we go to our wives, take it all to our wives, and then we are needy. And what I have found, especially strong women, they don't want any part of a needy man. That's kind of sad.
There's usually an initial phase, though, where the wife will transition into that mother role as an attempt to try to, resuscitate the marriage or the relationship. But then when the husband puts the woman there, the wife there, and tries to keep them there and goes into autopilot, and now we have extreme levels of dysfunction. It's interesting, though, how quickly that happens. And this list I have found to be nearly a silver bullet to stop that process from continuing and perpetuating inside of a relationship. And not only just the external relationship, the internal relationship, knowing yourself, knowing your own story, having something, and man, do we crave this. Just something to grab onto, a handhold to try to start this investigation, because it is scary. and nerve-wracking, but to say, all right, especially as a man, I'm working with a list here. Right?
I love it.
Got a list. I've got a list. And when we start rolling through this list, to be able to open up and uncover at a pace and a speed that we're comfortable with, being able to discuss that with other people, that's how we set things in our heart, by opening up our heart to other people. And certainly we would encourage same gender relationships for it to be the first place to occur, instead of just running, like getting out of your truck. I just heard a podcast episode. Here's how you're not meeting my desires.
Yeah. I'm running into Walmart and I'm getting on the loudspeaker. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, find other safe same gender relationships to start talking about what you're figuring out as you become curious over your own story.
Well, so much. Every time Jesus opened his mouth, he's talking about awareness. This is, all the great church fathers throughout history said the journey to God is an inward journey. I just like this stuff is there. It is the essence of life if we want to have the abundant life, the truth, the life, and the way that he offers us. And it's like, man, it's available. And I always say, if you want to go to heaven, go now. We're living in the kingdom as citizens of heaven if we are walking with God right here, right now. But it's this inner work, it's this change that has to happen.
To learn more about what you've heard today and to engage with the Sex, God, and Chaos team, visit sexgodchaos.com.